Welcome to episode 1. We're going to talk about the G-spot, where it is, why we should play with it,
what it is,
how to find it, how to play with it.
maybe even some personal stories.
Yes, so that's what we're going to do. Just so you know, these episodes, we have a portion that is public, so we're going to cover some content that's allowed on these platforms. For the content that's more explicit, we're going to be featuring that in our membership. So let's jump in.
All right.
So tell me, where is the G-spot?
Well, first of all, why did we choose this question?
Well, it was the number one most searched question. Where's the G-spot?
Around sex.
Yeah, it was amazing in Google. So everybody wants to know.
Everybody wants to know. This is also actually a huge piece of contention.
Controversy.
Big controversy in terms of it exists, it doesn't exist. Some women have it, some women don't have it. And I think it leaves a lot of room for confusion and frustration.
I agree. So to this day, there's issues, and it's the issues with the research part is that the researchers themselves are not asking the right questions. Therefore, the results they're getting are not what would be helpful, let's say, to people who are being sexual.
Well, also too, there is kind of a yes and or yes, no and answer about this in terms of what's normally being asked is there a specific anatomical structure that is this spot that can be found and located and then be kind of almost extracted and identified, so then we can say this is what this is, and then that's the place that everyone should be looking to touch.
Okay, so is there a specific spot that, like a button, a magic button that you find every single time you stick your finger in a vagina?
Well, this is the thing that's interesting on it, because it's also, there's sort of it's like a changing sea of sensation that's happening there. The ocean never stays the same. So when you're pushing on said spot, and I haven't even said if there is this spot yet, then is it going to always feel the same? Is another thing. Because
and what does it even feel like? But first, let's answer the mystical question.
Well, I think that it's become quite obvious that there is not anatomical structure like this is my nail here, therefore I can take it out, this nail is what needs to get stimulated. However, what you can say though is that if you press here at the base of my finger, it's going to create a lot of blood flow and create different sensation throughout the rest of the finger, and I can most accurately do that by pushing right here on this place.
Yes.
So is it an anatomical structure? No, it is not. However, is it a pressure point, or let's say a pleasure point, by which many different anatomical structures get stimulated, engorged, filled with blood, and then start to deliver tremendous amounts of sensation and pleasure? Absolutely.
Fantastic. So that means, and here was my pet peeve, when I was writing my dissertation, a piece of research came out saying not all women have G-spots, and I found it really irritating. It would be the equivalent of saying not all men have prostate glands. So anatomically, the structure of the tissue is the urethral sponge. The urethral sponge in the male ends up being the prostate gland, and in the female, it's like our female prostate, it lengthens and creates this spongy tube all around the urethra. But anatomically, inside both the prostate and the urethral sponge are tons of little ducts that create kind of a periurethral fluids that are in the female body, similar to prostate fluid, but with less male hormones.
I've been always very curious as well if the urethral sponge, which then goes around the urethra, which is the P tube for those of you who are wondering, in the female body, if this then with male genitalia is equivalent to as well the corpus spongiosum, which is that area of tissue that then also goes around the underside of the penis and around the urethral tube as well.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a different tissue from what I understand in terms of fetal development. Because of like your mouth right now has how many saliva glands?
Yeah.
And if you see something tasty, whether it's food or a person, your mouth will fill with saliva. So the that spongy tissue also really responds, and there's way more periurethral ducts than there are saliva glands. So the amount of wetness that can be generated by those ducts is incredible.
Well, I find, at least from a stimulation standpoint
Yes.
as well, is that as you, let's say, and it's easy to visualize with the penis, so I'll start there. If you were to start from the prostate and then send like kind of a pulse and stimulation, or even slide your finger up the underside of the base of the penis towards the head, while also maybe even keeping pressure on the prostate, it's kind of like if you were having one of those long balloons and then you were to slide your hand along it, there's going to be a lot of blood pressure, sensation, blood flow that gets pushed towards the head of the penis, and you'll see a change in color, you'll see a change in sensation, you know, like there's a lot of things that start to happen when you do that. And the equivalent then, if you were to slide your finger from the depth of the vagina, and we will talk about the CUV complex at some point, but slide from the depth of the vagina along that upper wall towards the belly, and where the urethral sponge is on the other side of the vaginal lining, and then slide all the way towards where you make contact into the pubic bone. When you create pressure by either sliding the finger, and then especially when then it goes into that pubic bone, it sends a lot of blood flow and also sensation into the clitoral legs, into the glands, which is like the head of the clitoris, which would be the equivalent of like the male penis. The legs of the clitoris would be the equivalent of the two big bodies on the top of the penis, which are the corpus cavernosum. And so like this whole area just gets charged with added blood flow, which means there's more oxygen, which means then there's more firing going to the nerves to send back, oh, we're getting a lot of pleasure here.
Yes.
And so structurally stimulating these parts of the bodies from the inside out, and naturally bringing blood flow this way from inside out, as opposed to pushing in, which is kind of how a lot of times we do, either by like, imagine like your typical hand job, or even just stimulating the clitoris from the outside. We're not encouraging that blood flow to come out and then get a lot of these areas super engorged, which then is when the body is going to have a chance to start to feel pleasure. And that's even if there's no tension there, which has to then be relieved, because there's a whole bunch of things that can kind of come up when
we'll
being
definitely
stimulated.
teach on that in the explicit part of today's episode. So we'll teach you how to bring that blood flow and what to do exactly to get that G-spot to activate.
And this is a big one that we're going to bust here, and it's not the kind of newest, the quote-unquote new information that's out there on G-spot stimulation is this come hither, which everyone knows, but this is like just a fraction of what can really be done to help this
because
area
part of the stimulation isn't just the giver, it's also the receiver.
There we go.
But we'll get into that in the explicit part. So, but first of all, okay, so there's not an actual structure, but it is part of the urethral sponge.
Yes.
And
well, I think we could even go more than that. So like I would say the spot itself, when you press through the vaginal wall, you are stimulating the urethral sponge. As you get closer towards that pubic bone area where it makes contact, you will be stimulating the Skene's glands. You're going to be stimulating, actually kind of where a lot of all these structures come together, isn't something that's typically known, but it's a Colbelt's venous plexus, which is where the glands and the clitoral legs join together. And also then you have the urethral sponge. And so all of this area literally like gets hyper-innervated. Also, what would you call that? With lots of veins or capillaries. Yes. Like, so like lots of blood infusion that's going on there, hyper-oxygenated. And then when you then place pressure in that spot, which would be, let's say, maybe anywhere from, I guess we can just say inches. Anyway, say maybe about an inch to 3 inches in along that upper wall. You'll feel, if you were to slide, kind of where it just naturally dips a little bit. And then if you were to curl your finger back, which you typically see now is like this kind of come hither motion, but really like make contact to the bone, which is the back side of the pubic bone. You'll feel like there's a harder structure there. And when this does, it creates that pinch that then sends that sensation out. But of course, if there's tension there, then it's not going to be experienced as a good
Yeah,
sensation.
and if there's no arousal, you won't feel it. So arousal is, in order for the G-spot to quote unquote exist, arousal is needed. So a lot of times if a woman's vulva isn't engorged, or she's paranoid, or something's going on with her emotionally where it's not, she's got tension in either her emotions or her mind or her body, there won't be significant blood flow. And that area, she'll be like, I don't feel anything. There's nothing there. But there also can be numbness there.
Yeah, there can be numbness, but or even like, I think a lot of times the sensation a person feels is
They need to pee.
Like they need to pee, maybe like kind of an increase in pressure.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar to if a penis is not erect and you then squeeze it, you can feel that there's some pressure change there. But if the penis is erect and then you were to squeeze at the base of it, there's a lot you're gonna, that is a quote unquote pressure point.
So that's important. It's the G-spot is part of erectile tissue.
Mm-hmm.
So and think of it as there was one researcher who defined the urethral sponge like in 4 distinct shapes.
Mm-hmm.
And the sensitivity or the nerve cluster that we relate to as the G-spot. So as you were saying, 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 inches in is a huge range of where this might be.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we actually find it? If there's engorgement, that ridge-like structure on the upper vaginal wall towards the belly, and then just feeling around until there's a sense of, as you said, maybe pressure or tingling or feeling like you're going to need to pee. There's different sensations that kind of mark that.
Well, I think one way of like kind of trying to find it is where you're going from the outside in and you find where the sort of like the mound ends or the divots in. But I think probably the easiest way, to be honest, is actually to go back far and create pressure along the upper wall and then slide forwards and explore what is the sensation that I feel. And notice that when you slide and then come towards and make contact to the pubic bone, where is it that you're getting like most of the sensation there? And so I think maybe we could talk about, well, what is the sensation you feel for?
Well,
and also the different shapes then, like you mentioned
let's talk
with the
about
sponge.
Sensation as the giver first. Like what are you feeling in your fingers? Or your
Well, let's talk actually, I think, from the person who's receiving it.
First.
Because they're the one that's going to be able to tell the giver.
Yeah, but sometimes a receiver doesn't know and has numbness. So.
Well, that's why I think we should talk then about, well, even if you're numb though, what would be a hint?
Give us both.
How do we feel? Okay.
Give us both. So, as a female body receiving touch there, my body translates it to really intense pleasure. And that really intense pleasure, from what I understand, it's kind of a blended firing of both the pudendal nerve, which is what the clitoris is being signaled by, and the pelvic nerve, which is what the cervix is being signaled by. There's a crossover in this area. And so the sensation...
And you also get the hypogastric nerve.
Exactly. And the vagus nerve, we've heard. So there's a lot of innervation, but like there's no specificity. The research isn't actually distinct and clear. So I think blended orgasm is sort of the best definition. So the sensation is very pleasurable. I think if I didn't know pleasure...
Compared to like the clitoris then.
But it's that feeling when you really need to pee, and you finally get to pee, that release, that feeling like, there's a really nice, pleasurable release feeling. It's tingly maybe, or warm, and yes, it's tingly, warm, pleasurable peeing, let's call it. But it's right before the pee when you're like, almost that urgency, there's a pressure buildup in the body. It's that similar feeling, but I don't label it that way for myself. For me, it's just always been ecstatic, and I don't label it as the need to pee. I never felt I was peeing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think to relate it to the person's body who has a penis is that if you were to rub the head of the penis, that would be a lot more like stimulating the clitoris versus then squeezing at the base of the penis and feeling that pressure change, which can be like maybe a bit painful for some people. Other people it's going to feel like just very intense. Other times it's going to be then defined as pleasure. And I think as like you find the correct pressure and the correct timing, then that sensation can change. But yes, somebody who, let's say if there was numbness, the descriptions I've typically heard from clients is that they feel maybe like a sharp, like little stabbing sensation. Can be the sensation of needing to pee, that there's kind of like a pressure there that they feel like is creating a lot of just pressure, but that's kind of like one of them where it's not really like much sensation in a way, but there's kind of like normally you'll notice like a change in the breath, or like it gets your attention, and those would be the signs I think on the lower end of the spectrum. The other things can be, like I said, stabbing pain, burning, even if the numbness part though is there, or maybe let's say the stabbing pain and the burnness, there's typically an emotional component that some people might pick up on more, which is a sense of like you don't feel much, but you just kind of like want to squirm and get away from the sensation.
Yeah.
So this sort of agitation, sort of like, I guess if you have to go pee and you don't want to, but you're just kind of like stop. The other one can actually be a sense of anger or frustration that can be there. Other things, especially when it starts to change more towards sensation and pleasure, I've noticed that there can be even like a greediness to that spot, as it really, really wants to be stimulated quite intensely once it opens up, like towards more, or once the tension's been released. And then sort of as it really starts to open up and then gets stimulated, and let's say even going into orgasms that tend to be generated from more focused stimulation in this area, is that the person has a shift towards being very generous and like wanting to almost caretake and give back and return pleasure towards the person who was administering the touch.
So I would say, because we're covering like where it is and what is it in this part,
what
we
things
did a
to kind
pretty
of be
good
looking for inside yourself.
But I think as a giver, to feel the structure, I know if I just touch myself inwardly, for some women that's creepy or weird, they've never put a finger in a vagina, the texture is very different. So putting a finger right behind the front teeth, there's like a ridgy part of the palate
called the alveolar ridge. I'm a linguist, so
so when the urethral sponge starts to engorge, you can have these ridge-like structures so the structure changes the more stimulation you're giving it. With engorgement, it's changing, and then it's got a structure where there's sides to it.
Yes.
So
I actually described a lot of time as opposed to it being a spot, which I guess would be the place that the pressure would create the most, but the structure is more of a mound that, in the same way that like a penis, when it gets engorged, there's certain parts of the penis that are going to swell more. Some penises are thicker at the base, at the middle, at the front, and so like you were saying with the urethral sponge, that you could have a structure where maybe it's kind of, if you imagine this tube that's thicker in the middle, or it could be that it has like a rounder part at the front or towards the back, or a dent kind of in the middle. But basically though, what I've found is most often the case is that, and you can almost see it if you were to look at the vagina with the lips open, and then you would see the clitoris on the top, you'd see the whole of the urethral opening.
Where you pee-pee from.
Where pee-pee's from. And then there's these two lines that kind of come down, and then there's actually like a rounded part that's that upper wall, and as opposed to just being flat, underneath the urethral sponge, you'll see that it's actually curved,
yes.
And it's curved down, so it would look almost like a U shape. And then that whole U area will literally start to swell and push forwards, and when there's engorgement happening there. And so you will feel almost like a mound on that front side, the sides on the left, the right, and then that back side. And so as you start to feel around that mound and find where the finger naturally kind of sinks in, this is that area of erectile tissue that you are stimulating. and then creating pressure from behind, and then basically as it's filled up with
Oh, I
blood,
can't wait to
pushing
get into the
into
explicit part of the conversation.
Yes, I guess I got to save a little bit.
Yeah,
there,
we
right?
need to wrap this up. So I hope you received a lot of
Yeah.
that it does exist, but it's not a particular anatomical
Well, real quickly,
spot.
though, why would a person want to deal with this if it does feel painful? If it does have different emotions and anger and stuff, why is it not better just to avoid this?
Yeah. So once you know where it is, the fact that you get to play with it, why would you bother if it's painful or annoying or frustrating? Because it won't always be that way.
Mhm.
So just think about any part of the body that you ignore for a long time. It's going to maybe atrophy, so it's not as functional as if it was being used robustly.
Yes.
And then we tend to store in areas of the body that we abandon. We tend to store old memories or pain or kind of stuff, especially the vulva. We will stuff down all our uncomfortable life experiences into the tissue. So working with your body can actually transform these areas of discomfort, and they can actually become their place of greatest pleasure. So yes, sometimes there's a little bit of a journey of reclamation, of self-acceptance, of exploration. But the nerves, they actually want to signal pleasure. They don't want to signal pain, but the nerves are designed to signal both. So if you have a little bit of pain and you try and ignore it, it's going to kind of always remain in that pleasure signal of pain. But if you start to work consciously with it, with the breath, have a direct relationship, allow the feelings to come forward, then eventually that tissue will change into its optimal state, which is pleasure. And then from there, the pleasure is extraordinary. And that's empowering for women who want to have, quote unquote, more vaginal based orgasms.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get into it. To join us for the complete and explicit version of the podcast, simply upgrade your membership and gain instant access.